Our country has been held in the past by comparison to other countries in this regard. The newest addition, by the way, to the New York subway system is the 2nd Avenue subway, which according to Reason magazine opened in 2017 and cost $4.45 billion just for the 2 miles from 63rd Street to 96th Street.
The full project? Yeah, that's expected to cost $16.8 billion, or $2.6 billion per mile.
Which is a price tag that's between 8 and 12 times more expensive than it would have been if it had been built in Europe. The same exact thing. And it also makes that part of the subway officially the most expensive subway ever built at $2.6 billion a mile. Oh, and also, it took almost a century to build it. They've been trying to build that for a century.
While first proposed in the 1920s, it didn't materialize until the early 2000s.
And it also was more than $500 million over budget by the time they were done.
But building infrastructure in the US, and in this case, subways, is very expensive. In fact, it is the 6th most expensive place to build rail transit in the world. And even that is likely an understatement.
It took a century to build that, and it was more than $500 million over budget when they finished it. But that is nothing, however, compared to the California high-speed rail project.
The very model of modern engineering, it hums across the fruited plains at a top speed of 200 miles an hour. It's revolutionized travel. It's a source of national pride in Morocco. Here in the U.S., high-speed rail looks like this.
Which was supposed to be operational by 2020 when it was initially proposed, but it was voted on in 2008.
An ambitious state-run project connecting L.A. and San Francisco has lurched, derailed, cost billions, and may never happen.
But after years of accusations of everything from systematic management failures to flawed decision-making to outright claims of sweetheart deals and corruption, billions of dollars have been spent, and they don't even know when this project is going to be finished. The total initial cost was supposed to be $33 billion, but that figure has reportedly ballooned now to $127 billion. And the first segment of track is slated to be $206 million a mile. And that's if there aren't any more overruns. And according to the California Policy Center, the financing alone, based on preposterously optimistic ridership projections for this segment of 6.6 million riders per year and a 30-year term at 5% annual interest, would work out to the cost of $348 per ticket, which I can tell you right now in this economy means they're not going to get anywhere near 6 million riders. That's just not a thing at all. Not exactly an easily affordable means of travel. The project's a disaster. That is what is pretty much the consensus on it, and it's likely to be a drain on Californians because the ticket revenue will not even cover the operating costs, let alone the staggering sums that are now projected to cover actually constructing it. And there's a 300-plus page Federal Railroad Administration report, which I'm going to fully admit to you I did not entirely read through because that is a massive thing, but I did skim through the first few pages because they're giving a notice of intent to terminate 2 federal funding agreements for $4 billion, and they're citing a pattern of broken promises, perpetuating the same inefficient project management activities with minimal progress to advance the actual construction of this high-speed rail. And that just came out last year. All of this while the rest of California is literally falling apart. As the Hoover Institution pointed out, in 2018, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave California a D- on its energy infrastructure due to age and chronic extreme fire risk. A D+ for stormwater with drainage systems that have not been updated much since the 1940s. A D on levees, which could cost $45 billion to bring up to date, and a D on their roads, which have been ranked 49th worst in the country and would need $130 billion in investment to fix. And a C for their drinking water. And there's 1 million Californians that are without consistent clean drinking water. So the problem with spending money on rational, practical solutions that lower the cost of living and improve the quality of life for millions of Californians is that this goal is inconvenient for the special interests that run California, the California Policy Center concluded. And that right there is a running theme in this country, as it has been for well over a century. And they go on to make the point the true motivation behind all of these useless mega projects that never seem to come to fruition and are mired in corruption, and the money just seems to vanish without anything actually being done, is really a desire to neglect California's essential water, power, and transportation infrastructure, because by creating artificial scarcity and engineering higher prices for all of these resources, the public utilities and private energy producers can reap larger profits. And it plays out across all of these economic sectors. And so really they're just keeping people in this trap and squeezing them more and more and more for basic essential things they need to exist in California, while they give basically a little more than lip service to these mega projects that probably won't really help the average person very much. And that's what it's like everywhere. It's not like California is alone in this. This is how our country is. I have been in a car and road tripped extensively throughout this country. It is like this everywhere. This country's falling apart. It has been for a very, very long time.
The pothole problem creating a traffic nightmare on the 71 freeway at Holt Avenue in Pomona Wednesday after numerous large potholes opened up, stranding dozens of drivers.
The ride through this West Omaha neighborhood is anything but smooth.
They both work as couriers for the city of Compton, and they had driven over so many potholes, it was beginning to cost them their living. So the De La Rosas decided to act. They're now driving from pothole to pothole across the city.
I looked at the on the bucket, there was like a picture of you flattening it, so I'm like, see if it's easy enough. City ain't coming, so we gotta do this. All up to us.
Just setting up this shot, we saw another car lose a tire to this pothole. We're told it's not a new problem. Some drivers know to avoid it. So why hasn't this been fixed yet?
Groups like the World Economic Forum and the C40 cities and things like that, some of which our mayors in cities here are on those groups and go to the WEF. And somehow there's a disconnect between them talking about we're going to have 15-minute cities and, nobody needs to own a car. We're not going to have car ownership. When we here in America live in a car-centered country.
In this motion picture,
giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashum, Yahweh Shai, Bahashum, Rakha Kodash. I want to give double honors to our apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well, and grace and peace to you elect around the four winds, believing and pushing this truth in all sincerity. May the blessing of election be upon your houses. This is your fellow servant, Rakoya from the GMS Orlando camp, coming at you with another impromptu lesson. And the title of this lesson is going to be The Planned Obsolescence of America is Now in Full Effect. All right, and I have that definition of what planned obsolescence means here on Google. And it says planned obsolescence, also known as built-in obsolescence, is a deliberate business strategy where a product is intentionally designed with an artificially limited lifespan or made to become unfashionable after a set period. Now, normally, these will be referring to assets like cell phones, certain clothing brands, cars, and certain different types of technologies. All right, but in this case, all right, the product is America Babylon the Great. All right, America has been designed deliberately, all right, to have a limited lifespan. First and foremost from the Heavenly Father, all right, from Yahweh, Bahashum Yahweh Shai, the Lord has given the so-called white man a limited time on his rulership. All right, let's get that in Job. This is Job chapter 14 and verse 5. I'm going to start at verse 4. It says, who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? Not one. Seeing his days are determined, the number of his months are with thee. Thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. All right, and so the Lord has set a bound on this kingdom, all right, on the kingdom of the Edomites, all right, in which that present kingdom is America, all right, also referred to as Babylon the Great, according to the scriptures. All right, the Lord has set a bound on this kingdom. Okay, America has a very limited lifespan, and we're starting to see, all right, that planned obsolescence come into full effect. All right, it says, a deliberate business strategy where a product is intentionally designed with an artificially limited lifespan or made to become unfashionable after a set period. Its goal is to force consumers to replace the item sooner, driving long-term sales, in which the goal here is to force consumers into receiving the RFID microchip. All right, to put people under so much constraint and so much pressure that they're forced to receive this devil's mark with promises of receiving normalcy again. You know, like you heard in the video, a lot of not just Californians. You know, this is a problem that is stretching throughout the four corners of America. All right, no matter what state that you go to, or is facing the same problem. Some states are worse than others, but nonetheless, this is a common issue in Babylon the Great, failing infrastructure. All right, which the Lord also said in the book of Malachi. Let's see, Malachi 3. Yeah, this is Malachi 1 and verse 4. It says, "Whereas Edom said, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord have indignation forever." You know, and the Lord is throwing down everything that the so-called white man is trying to build, whether it be according to his infrastructure, this new monetary system, all right, biotechnology, whatever the case may be. The so-called white man is constantly trying to build, and we see the Lord constantly throwing down. You know, no matter where you go around America, you know, Chicago, Indiana, California, Florida, Texas, all right, the infrastructure is in a common state. All right, there's always how would you say, remnants of the start of a building project. You know, you might see the beams, or you might see certain blocks laid out, or certain neighborhoods being started, the land cleared out to start certain neighborhoods, and the foundation being built to start certain houses. But over the course of the years, you never see the finished product of these different buildings. And that's because the Lord is constantly casting down everything that the so-called white man is building. And that's a common sentiment across America. Here in Florida, they've been trying to build and expand Kissimmee and St. Cloud for years. They've been trying to expand that area and make it to whereas you can fit and create more cookie cutter neighborhoods, you know, and more 55 plus communities, because here in Florida it's a very popular retirement state. You know, you have a lot of elderly who retire from northern states and come down here to Florida for, you know, the warmer weather and so on and so forth. You know, and they tend to pay higher prices. But you know, here in Florida, it's a common theme to see 55 plus neighborhoods starting to be built. You know, land cleared out, land bought, you know, and cleared and surveyed to start these different communities, as well as you know, the buildings of these different highways, the remnants of you know, highways being built. You know, it's very prevalent here in Florida to see that, you know, to see these different things. But as the course of the years go by, you never see these things finished. You never see the finished product of these certain communities or these highways. And it's because of the planned obsolescence of America. All right? The elites don't want, ultimately they don't plan on improving the infrastructure or building better. They don't plan on building more highways or and improving the roadways, which the roadways are fucking terrible. I just ran over a pothole the other day here in Florida. I damn near took my wheel off. You know, while I was in Chicago last week, on the way, taking an Uber on the way back to the airport, the guy hit a pothole that struck the whole fucking car up, man. You know, the infrastructure concerning the road is terrible, and it's for a reason. The elites don't plan on improving these different things because they already have a plan in mind, which is to build these 15-minute cities and to have everyone corralled like cattle into one or a few central areas to where they're able to better control the populace. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the final goal of the so-called white man is to be as God in the planet Earth. And the way that he's going about establishing his godhood in the planet Earth is through biotechnology. Okay, integrating technology into our biology in the form of the RFID microchip, which will give him the capability of not only monitoring the inward state of the body, but also putting a strain and a control over buying and selling. All right, because with that integrated, all right, with that technology integrated, he will be able to monitor the body as well as dictate buying and selling, who you can buy with, where you buy, all right, what you buy, where you buy it, and so on and so forth. All right, because everything at that point in time will be on a centralized system, to where they can control and monitor it. So at the end of the day, we understand the so-called white man's end goal, and we understand why we're starting to see the planned obsolescence of America take full effect. Why we're starting to see the infrastructure getting worse and worse. Why we're starting to see failed building projects, and more money being siphoned into these big corporations. And the reason being is because the elites plan on being as God. They don't plan on people having this much freedom, traveling wherever the fuck you want to go. They're even putting a strain on interstate travel. When it comes to flights, if you don't have a real ID, you can't hop on a flight. You got to have a passport or a real ID to travel within the states. So that type of control and that type of restraint is coming on a larger scale. The scriptures say in the book of 2nd Esdras, the 15th chapter, let's see, in the 17th verse it says, "A man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able, for because of their pride the city shall be troubled, the houses shall be destroyed, and men shall be afraid." All right, so it says that a man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able. Ultimately speaking about martial law. But right now, we're starting to see the beginning stages of that martial law, starting with these real IDs, and eventually it's going to trickle down into these 15-minute cities and travel restrictions on land as well, concerning interstate travel. But yeah, I want to get this in 2nd Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, because, this has been speaking louder and louder, as the weeks and the months go by. The Lord has been putting certain emphasis on certain precepts and certain scriptures because they're starting to manifest. They're starting to show themselves in their fullness. And we're starting to see the fullness of the so-called white man's enterprise, in full effect. This is 2nd Thessalonians chapter 2. I'm going to start at verse 2. It says, "That ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that day of Yahushua HaMashiach is at hand." I always like to put this as a caveat. These things that are being brought out through the Spirit are not things that the Lord has given us understanding on to fear. All right. All of these things that are being brought out in the Spirit are ultimately things that the Lord wants us to understand, all right, and prepare for. The Lord has given us the understanding on certain prophecies and certain developments in the times that we're coming into as a way to give us comfort, all right, and to give us the ability to prepare and understand what's taking place and why it has to take place. So it says in verse 3, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come." All right, the day of the Lord shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. All right, and as we know, that falling away has happened. All right, primarily, in 69, 70 AD, during the besieging of Jerusalem. All right, by General Vespasian and Titus. All right, where the Israelites were scattered into the western horn of Africa and really around the world, at that point in time. and we lost our heritage. Over the years, over the generations, we lost our heritage, we lost the language, we lost the understanding of the Lord and who we were. All right, and to the point to where we found ourselves here in America, Babylon the Great, carried over here on ships. The vast majority of us. You also have Israelites who were carried on ships to Brazil, to Spain, and so on and so forth. All right, through the sub-Saharan slave trade, and many other slave trades that took place over the course of years. So that falling away has happened. All right, and now we're in the midst of the regathering or the reconciliation of the Lord's people. All right, of those scattered sheep, of those Gentiles. All right, which the Gentiles in the New Testament are largely referring to the Israelites who fell away from their heritage. All right, who are now being reconciled by the word of the Lord, which is taking place right now as we speak. All right, the Israelites who are lost, the lost sheep, are now being reconciled into the shepherd, which is Yahweh Shai, through the word. But it says that man of sin, the son of perdition, be revealed, right? And that man of sin and the son of perdition has been revealed to be none other than Esau, Edom. All right, the so-called white man. Chiefly the elites of the so-called white man, your Rockefellers, your DuPonts, your Gettys, and so on and so forth. All right, these elites, the men that have control and power over the resources, have been revealed to be none other than the man of sin, the son of perdition. All right, it says, who opposeth and exalt himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things. And now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. And now we're living in that time of the great revealing of Esau, Edom. All right, the Edomites are being revealed, and their evil, wicked devices and plans for the planet Earth are being revealed as well. The scriptures say in Wisdom of Solomon, the 1st chapter and the 9th verse, that inquisition shall be made upon the counsels of the ungodly. All right, and now we're living in that great day and age where inquisition has been made into the counsels of the ungodly, and now all of their wicked deeds are being brought to the forefront. And one of their wicked deeds, wicked devices, is the failing infrastructure of America. Which is ultimately to put the people, a device to put the people in a trap. It puts people in a trap. One of the traps that's laid, as the infrastructure fails and continues to be degraded and fail. As people drive over these things with their cars, tires are popped. Cars are damaged, which causes the consumer to have to spend more money on tires, more money on cars, more money on repairs and fixes and so on and so forth, which the average American in this day and age doesn't have the money for. So they're going to seek even more aid from the government, in which the government is going to put more and more stipulations on the requirements to receive that aid. So eventually it's going to lead to that RFID microchip, man. We can see the trap that's being laid through the spirit and power of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. And this failing infrastructure is just one of many. It's just one of many. And brothers speak about it all the time, man. Because brothers are constantly, back and forth in their travels. And it's something that's unavoidable. It's something that, you can't really look over. The infrastructure here in Babylon is fucking terrible. You look up let's see. trying to find the grade levels, but we might not be able to find the grade levels. Here in Florida, it's a C+, which that's fucking, that has to be wrong. Aviation is a C-. Get to the drinking water, it's a B. Energy is a B-. Let's see. Go to Georgia. It's a C+. You know, and you could look it up for yourself. You know, some of these grades have to be 4s. You know, but as a whole, the infrastructure in America is fucking terrible, and it's by design. You know, it's all according to the planned obsolescence that the elites, ultimately the Heavenly Father, you know, but the elites have in mind in order to bring the people into that final order, which is to receive that RFID microchip, in the hopes of returning or having some form of normalcy in their lives again, you know. But I just want to bring this quick video out, man. Nothing too long. I just want to touch on this topic very briefly, because as I was watching that video, you know, it just you know, I just had to bring it out, man. That's exactly what's happening, man. A snare is being laid for the people, you know, as we speak, in this failing infrastructure, and it's only going to continue to worsen over the time, you know, until eventually what we're going to see is different 15-minute cities, you know, built, different checkpoints that are built, you know, to corral the people into a few central points that will allow the so-called white man or the elites to control the populace even better. But with that being said, Lord, and edifying, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Vakakodash, and double honors to our apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well. Grace and peace to you elect around the four winds, believing and pushing this truth in all sincerity. Shalom. Stay up.